review from the Winging It F1 podcast. I'm Freddie. I'm going to be leading the day today, and I'm joined by Adam and Nigel, who are fellow Miami Grand Prix viewers. Guys, how are you doing? Nigel, what's new? What's Trix? How's Trix?
How's Trix?
How's
I don't know who
Trix?
she is. Yes.
How's
What's
Trix
new?
is a phrase?
Is it? What does it mean?
How's it going? How are you?
How's it going? I'm good.
You know the question he asked like 2 seconds before saying how's Trix.
Yeah, I've not been sleeping much, and I don't do well when I'm not sleeping. So, yeah.
Thank you for that honest answer.
I'm always honest.
Yep. Adam, are you going to just say that you're doing bad as well?
No, I'm fine, Freddie. I thought you were going to introduce us as following today rather than leading today, but you went in different directions instead.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I just speak. How is
your what this podcast is for 191 episodes?
How is your end of university going, Adam? For all of those who were paying attention.
It's still very busy for those who tuned in last time and expected it to be any different this time. It is indeed not. But yeah, apart from that, it's there's job hunting going on. There's choices being made or not being made. So yeah, it's all very busy, and it's only how many days are in May? 31. It's only 24 days until I hand my last thing in.
Wow.
And in the space of that, there's two Grand Prix in the start of another one. So that's great.
Yeah, that's unhelpful. Anyway,
let's talk with April now, really.
Oh, yeah, sure. We can talk about the Miami Grand Prix if you want to. Do you guys want to chat about that?
Let's do it.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah, if we must. The race was won by Max Verstappen, even though he started ninth on the grid. The Red Bull is fast. We know that. Max Verstappen is a fast driver who drove a very, very good stint on his opening set of hard tyres in that race that probably, in my opinion, won in that race. And yeah, it kind of looked like a surefire deal from about lap 15, lap 10.
Yeah.
He'd win the race.
Probably 10, to be honest.
What about
lap 10? You serious?
When he was in second and he was still only like 3 seconds off Perez.
Nah. Because what I thought would happen was when Perez pitted for his hard tyres, he would slowly take a couple attempts here and there out of Verstappen consistently, which he did early on.
Mm-hmm.
But then Verstappen brought it back, and the net time loss or net time gain from Perez was 0 when Verstappen pitted. So that was where the race was lost for me. And I think it was between lap 32 and lap 43 when Verstappen. So both drivers were getting quicker and quicker, but Verstappen was going faster than Perez at that point, and that was really exceptional in terms of tyre management, balancing the car, not making a mistake. Because there was a couple of laps where Perez he lost over half a second in one sector. He probably went wide or something. Then his tyres are dirty for the next few corners and that kind of thing. So I really thought it was a fantastic drive from Verstappen. Perez in the position he was in, leading after lap 1 with his teammate down in 10th actually after the first lap because Verstappen lost out to Bottas. He really should have won, but I think what we saw was the difference between the two drivers in terms of Verstappen is just simply better 9 times out of 10. So I think that's what we saw. Yes, it was kind of inevitable, but for me, I quite enjoyed the pure aspect of 2 very good drivers, one outstanding driver going for it over a whole race. No safety cars, no incidents, no retirements. I don't even think there was a yellow flag either. So yeah, I quite enjoyed that pure aspect. I'd even argue it was the best race of the season so far.
I wouldn't argue that.
Yeah.
No, because I think it was, for me, it was similar to Baku, and that it was appreciable, but not necessarily massively enjoyable. If that makes sense. Like, you can see all that kind of stuff happening. It's like, this is great. That he's doing fantastic. He's doing a really good job, and I'm appreciating the performance of it. It's just there's only so much of that I can then think this is really exciting, because I didn't think necessarily. I thought it was impressive and worthy of note, and worthy of what you just said of being like a really fantastic stint on the tyres, where they were 30 to 40 laps old, and he was going faster than someone who were 15, 20 laps old, which is, a very, very big deal. But it was just sort of the way it came to that was all kind of like, oh, okay, cool. There's some nice midfield fights in this as well, for wheel-to-wheel action. But for the most part, I thought, yeah, take it or leave it.
Do you not think, though, the two Red Bull drivers are pushing every single lap, getting faster and faster, every single corner, every sector, and the small sort of mistakes that we saw with Perez, he made a few times, that was what made the difference. And for me, that kind of pure art of motor racing, of pushing the limits, I absolutely love it. I'd love that more than the kind of dramatic moments. Personally.
Well, that's fair. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I just didn't have that feeling so much with it because, I think this is probably because of the story of the weekend more, is that in every practice session, Perez was half a second off when you really were focusing on the gaps, when it definitely got to pit crunch time for Verstappen, when it would have, was sort of supposedly hotting up, was when then Perez was just losing time consistently, hand over fist. And then that sort of, to me, that didn't become really exciting. It stayed being impressive, but it made everything more inevitable and less tense in terms of what's going to happen, because for me there was an answer to what was going to happen, and that's what
I'd absolutely agree with Freddie on that. I think it's impressive from Verstappen, but it was just really quite clinical. I mean, even the way he got through the grid, it was just efficient. It wasn't kind of hair raising, I don't think. I mean, the double overtake on Leclerc Magnussen was pretty cool, but it wasn't like edge of your seat stuff really. And that's not his job. His job is to win the race, and he did. But for, when you're a neutral watching, then that's not, I'm with Freddie that it felt pretty predictable from a fair way off. I mean, even in Baku then, because of the way the drivers were, Verstappen is a better driver than Perez, and it always felt like there was a chance, or particularly, for deeper into the race, it felt like there was a chance that, he could turn it around and get back. Whereas here, it just seemed quite clear pretty early on that Verstappen was able to unlock more of the car and just be able to get those chunks into Perez that he couldn't. And, like I say, if it would have been a lot more exciting if it had been coming down to that last lap catch or the last 2 laps catch and it had been peaking there. But, the way he came out of the pits about 1.5 seconds behind and then was immediately onto the back of Perez, there wasn't any jeopardy really for me for
I just don't think it was predictable though, because on lap 32, Perez got the gap down to 14 seconds. He was going much faster, and it was only those 10 laps afterwards where Verstappen picked up the pace. So from lap 20 to 32, I can't see how anyone could say, oh yeah, Verstappen's definitely got this, because Perez was going faster for a dozen laps or so.
I just think that would have pushed an earlier pit stop from Verstappen though, and it would have just meant that gap would have been kept as it was to try and get him onto the offset quicker. I think that makes sense. I feel like that Perez mistake then made that even easy is the wrong word, because obviously it's at an intense level, but gave a bit more of a cushion that allowed that to then be even more inevitable, because it meant that Verstappen's stints could be extended by a touch, because it was a late pit stop for him. But I think if it had been even more of a threat from Perez, then it would have just been an earlier pit stop of Verstappen to mean that offset was there when the gap was as good as it could be.
Yeah, but it would have been an earlier pit stop, but say if the gap was 14, 13, 12 seconds, you would have had 6, 7, 8 seconds to catch up.
Yeah,
which is a massive difference to 1.5. And
yeah,
then I
but
think
he would have had longer to do it. That's my point.
So then his tyres could wear out towards the end. When he's
but he would have had longer on those tyres on a lighter car. He only did, 10, 11 laps on the mediums? If he had done 17, he still would have had an offset, because Perez did 20-odd laps on those. So there still would have been an offset on it.
Well, I guess I just quite enjoyed the pure driving aspect of it.
That's cool.
Personally,
I'm really glad you did enjoy it, to be honest, because
I kind of think I know you can't.
Not for that kind of reason, because a lot of races can be really exciting for that kind of reason, and it can be lost. And I think sometimes I can find that kind of race really interesting. And this time, I don't know, the story of the race seemed to be exactly what I thought it was, and it was. It was for me. It was completely predictable instead of unpredictable. Unfortunately,
what I'd say is, and I know if you've got a different car, you get a different outcome, different teams. But if you had a different team, say that was Leclerc or Hamilton in Perez's shoes, I don't think you guys would be saying this, and obviously it would have been different anyway, different cars. But I think some people are saying this. It's just because it was 2 Red Bulls out in front. If it's just 2 different teams.
But even if it is just because it's 2 Red Bulls, I'm not saying this out of any like hatred for Red Bull.
Yeah.
It's because it's kind of like there's no jeopardy to it, because it's just, oh look, the Red Bulls are in a 1-2 and the better driver is doing the better job. What a surprise. And when you look at it from that perspective, it's not massively exciting. There's not the sort of ball in loads of different courts could go any different way. It's a sort of like, oh, the map has been followed exactly as you'd expect it to when one of the drivers was started on hard tyres and one of the drivers started on medium tyres. If this has become from 2 different teams where they're definitely duking it out in an entire different way, then maybe that yeah, I think that is more interesting. But when it's 2 cars that are in the same team that are so obviously faster, and the offset of the tyres has become so clear throughout that race, then as you were seeing with people like Hamilton, who was making such a big gain at the end as well, and Hulkenberg, I think, is the other one who was doing moves throughout on the mediums at the end and things like that. It's just kind of like you are seeing lots of differences in this tyre, that it's kind of, as the race goes on and on, the medium becomes even more and more understandable as a late race tyre than an early race tyre, and it just reinforced. Unfortunately, I think unfortunately, I'm really glad you didn't. I genuinely am really glad you enjoyed it, but I feel like, unfortunately, from my side, it's kind of like that was the case. I mean, I watched the whole race and I was interested in the whole race, but it's just kind of like the fight for the front for me was pretty much sort of. It reminded me of the US Grand Prix in 2019.
Yeah, Bottas and Hamilton.
Yeah, but that was to me, that was a bit better because they were just very openly fighting with each other. And there was a big open, like, oh, we're going to let these 2 duke it out. And they, you could see they both had a sort of input in the way they were racing with that. And it got a bit tighter. And to be honest, for the most part, I do think the pace was a bit closer between them through that race. This one just felt like the offset, unfortunately, let it down.
Interesting. I'll say, well, so far, obviously, it's the most underrated race. It probably could be the most underrated race of the season, then, from my side, which was good.
I think probably from your side, yeah, because we're not rating it very highly, unfortunately. I did discuss off mic earlier when we were having a chat earlier today that the track did do racing quite well through the midfield, though.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
once he got out of the early DRS train, which was, I think, from Bottas downwards, I think it was Hulkenberg, Hamilton, Tsunoda, and Albon, not necessarily in that order. And yeah, it kind of, at that stage, it was a bit like, this could not be great, but it did actually break open as teams pitted, and it did break out a bit. And there was, that chance to pass and repass leading up to the, from the back straight, then through the quick section up to the main straight. So I think Kevin Magnussen did that about 30 times, it felt like, over the race. But yeah, he did. He was one of my winners in my winners and losers column on totalmotorsport.com. So go and check that out. Don't forget the hyphen between the total and the motorsport. But yeah, it gave some opportunity to, defend effectively. The one asterisk to that was Verstappen with that Red Bull DRS. It was, and again, like going through the field, it felt quite clinical from him, which is the other reason I don't think, the overtakes he made felt very expected, because even though the track was in general able to have some pretty good battles between teams that aren't the closest, then for that Red Bull with the DRS, then it was just overpowering.
Yeah, but he did a lot of the overtakes on the brakes.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's impressive. On the brakes,
I thought the overtakes were impressive. Was it the one on Gasly was really impressive, I thought.
To turn 17.
Yeah, where he just sent it really late. He committed to it. And he just, if Gasly hadn't given him the space, or if Gasly, because it was a late move, if Gasly hadn't seen him coming, and to be honest, at that point, he had every right to not see him coming, but they both raced really well through there, and Verstappen was on the limit of where he could then give Gasly space. Gasly was giving him space and things like that, and you could just sort of, you could sort of feel through that move, just the body language of the car, just the sort of his hands tensing up and sort of gritting his teeth, going, stop, but also don't lock up. at the same time. And I thought, I thought they were very well done in that regard.
I'm convincing, Freddie. I can tell. I've got you. I'm not.
No, this is what I mean. Like the overall arc of the race over whatever it was, 57 laps.
Yeah, 57.
Yeah.
Wasn't for me, but there were bits in the race that were really interesting and quite exciting. And I thought Max for coming through the field did display some very, very good racing. Magnussen's just irritation of Leclerc for nearly 40 laps was fantastic and really well done, and just a sign of fantastic driving. Some of Russell's moves and some of Hamilton's late moves in the race were genuinely very, very good overtakes and genuinely very good racing. For the most part, there was lots of just really good, clean, fair racing through that race. And that was genuinely really interesting. It's just a shame that most of it was for just positions that were just there, if that makes sense.
I think more so for this race, for fans, or most fans in this case, they wouldn't have found it that exciting or intense. Well, I think the drivers, especially Verstappen, they would have gone, oh, that was proper intense, having to nail every single lap, that kind of thing. So for the drivers, they might have got enjoyment from that. That's where I kind of come from with that. But for fans, maybe
totally get that.
Not so much. But yeah. Anyway, we've had a nice little debate there.
No, that's cool. That's what it's for, guys. That's why we have a podcast. But that's our kind of thoughts on the lead battle on Max, on Perez. Would you say there's anything more Perez could have done apart from just not having made that pretty obvious mistake he did? Or do you think the medium tyres weren't holding in the way they would have been able to in the first stint anyway?
I think he could have managed the medium tyres a bit better. I felt like he should have had a 7, 8, 9, 10 second gap over Alonso rather than only
I agree.
A few seconds, 4 or 5 seconds at most.
Yeah,
I think that's where he lost the race more than his hard tyre. I mean, obviously his hard tyre stick could have been better as well, but I'd say if I had to choose one or the other, it was more the medium stint. He could have opened up the gap when his teammate was going through the pack for me.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. I think it was, and that's what I mean. Like for me, that was the reason that it was pretty predictable. Was that it was he just wasn't attacking that stint so much, and like you say, it was a few second gap. I mean, Verstappen was onto him by the time he did pit. I think he was within second or second and a half at most. So yeah, I think he probably could have done more. I still don't think that would have had a difference at the end of the race because Verstappen took him with 10 or 11 laps to go. But I think, it would have. This is what I mean. Like, if there had been that meeting point within the last 5 laps or the last 3 laps, I think that would have been more entertaining. But I think ultimately, whatever Perez did, apart from driving as fast as Max Verstappen, then I think Verstappen would have taken it either way because he was just the better driver.
Yeah, I think we were all kind of on the page with that. Someone who had a bit of a shocker of a weekend though was Charles Leclerc. We normally talk about him being the better driver, but Carlos Sainz seemed to have him covered this weekend. He crashed in Q3 after not having had a banker lap because he'd had a lockup, and then as mentioned, he was consistently mugged off by Kevin Magnussen in a Haas for a long time, and was passed by Lewis Hamilton late on in the race as well. It wasn't necessarily his weekend. Is it the Ferrari? Is it Charles getting his head down a bit? Is it a mixture of the two? Where do you guys stand on this? Nigel, come to you first.
I was just going to jump in. He passed Magnussen for the first time on either lap 3 or 4, and then he was still behind him when Magnussen pitted on, I think, lap 38. And it was just like every single time, Magnussen just felt like there was a bit of naivety at times when, he'd go for the overtake on the back straight and then Magnussen would just get straight back at him. But beyond that, it's just like Magnussen needed to race smarter, really. I think for Leclerc, it's just a strange one. Like, it was so different from Baku. Obviously, it was pretty much flip the script from Baku between the two Ferraris. But ultimately, like, neither of them had good race pace. They both got passed near the end of the race by Mercedes. So it wasn't, I think Sainz still got more out of the car, but I think in general it was a Ferrari problem that they could have got, or it looked like they could get more out of the weekend, both, on the grid before the race and even probably after the first pit stops.
I think Leclerc's crash hurt his confidence quite a lot, which is why his race wasn't as good, because in practice he was looking not at his very, very best, but he was ahead of Sainz and looking better, I'd say. But equally, the Ferrari lacked rear downforce, just like a lot of the cars and Mercedes as well. So I think that means that the drivers didn't have too much confidence, couldn't push too hard in fast corners, and that perhaps contributed to Leclerc's crash as well. So a mixture of both, but I do think Leclerc was kind of driving not right on the limit during the races because of his crash before for me.
Bit of a nervous back end for the Ferrari and the Mercedes, whereas a few cars with a bit more stability, able to cope a bit better. So, namely, the Alpine and the Haas, to be honest, proving they had some very stable, very workable cars, which will be very good late as we go into the sort of faster sweeps of the season.
Because that sector one, it feels, even watching it to me, it feels so nervous to cars. It feels like they could slide at any time. Then if they do, they'll have what Leclerc happened on Saturday.
Admittedly, with a very sketchy grip surface there, that was a very green track on Sunday, and it was a very, very green track at the start of the weekend. A resurfaced and then washed track because of a heavy shower overnight from Saturday to Sunday will lead to weird tire reaction on the day of the race, because the rubber that's been put down just isn't there, which was not going to play into the hands of the unstable cars, as we saw. I think though, as we said, the track did bode well. Do we think that was mostly the shortening to DRS zones, or do we think just there was more opportunity to see it this year?
I think DRS zones. I think it really helped. Like it made, like you said, with Verstappen, and then it pushed a lot of those moves onto the brakes, and then allowed the fight to keep going, like through to the next sector, to the main straight, and then it kind of restart all over again and give the chance to repass. So I think maybe a bit that drivers were more together, but to be honest, I just think it was more battleable.
I think it's just a good track. I mean, it got a lot of criticism last year, didn't it? But I think it's not a bad track at all. It's very, it's not the best, but it's definitely not the worst. It's probably somewhere in the middle, I'd say, because you can overtake. The cars can follow, in my opinion. There's a lot of talk that they can't this year, but they can. And I think from turn 17, that back straight down towards turn 17, then into turn 1, that section alone, I know it's only a few corners, but you can pass and repass, as we saw loads of times in there. And then you've got just a straight down to, what's the middle sector? Long straight, middle sector to the hairpin left, that one. So you got a few overtaking opportunities. So I think it's just a very underrated track. I keep using that word underrated in this podcast, but everything about Miami is just underrated. There you go.
Well, and there's a lot about Miami that's perfectly rated.
True.
There's probably some that's overrated as well. Maybe,
yes.
Possibly.
For the most part, I think, to be honest, a lot of the weekend has been well received, and a lot of it hasn't been well received. We are going to naturally touch on some of the show pieces of it. There's been responses from the drivers to those massive sort of shows they do before the race, the driver introductions. Majority sort of saying, well, I'd rather not do it. A few sort of going, well, it's a bit of fun. I think I kind of sit in between it, though. It's kind of like, it can be a bit of fun when it's done well. It can also be done really badly and can become a bit kind of just sort of necessarily loony. But for the most part, I'm okay with random things done if they're done well. I just feel like this was a bit kind of, I don't know, you need a bit more commitment, if that makes sense.
Well, it made me watch. I quite enjoy. I wouldn't like it all season, no way. But a couple of times just for a bit of entertainment, if you can call it that. I don't mind it personally.
I think it's a laugh.
Yeah, exactly.
But by commitment, what do you need? What do you mean?
From
like needing more commitment,
drivers, I guess. I think because I think they sort of really own it and just have a laugh with it. But I really get why that's really hard to do 15 minutes before you want to be in a high level sport, which I completely understand. Especially,
it was better. It was better than the 2017 one.
I don't know. I really like the 2017 one. I thought when they had the "Let's Get Ready to Rumble" man do everything, he had the voice for it. He just didn't know how to pronounce Kimi Raikkonen or Valtteri Bottas. So if he done a little bit to learn how to say the names, I did think that was an interesting baptism of fire for Brendon Hartley in his first ever F1 race. But I think for that, I thought I quite enjoyed it. And that worked at the end of the season when you had a bit going for it, I guess. But I think, yeah, I'm all right with it. It's just a bit mad.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff kind of didn't move the needle for me either way. Like I think like both of you said, I wouldn't want it over the whole season. It was, it was an interesting take on this race, but some of it worked, some of it didn't, which is always the way. And I think it does in future, rather than kind of throwing every celebrity at the wall and seeing what sticks. I think if they can maybe focus down on what worked and take away some of what didn't, I think I think that's what I'd like to see from them next year. But I don't think, they clearly want to make it the biggest F1 party of the season. And that's going to be Miami's thing. So if they can do that effectively and grow from this year, then I don't mind it.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. I think there does just necessarily need to be an inclusivity to it, but for the most part, Formula One is a television sport, but also it's, it shouldn't become unaspirational to be there. And I think it's very in danger of being entirely like that. And yeah, you've always had that with some events with sort of a Monaco or something, but that comes with the nature of Monaco as a place. The nature of that is that it's where celebrities live. But as long as Formula One can sort of keep a foot on the ground, then you can kind of allow like Nigel, like you say, sort of every other, like not all the time, but also you've got to be able to then have a decent offering at every race. And like if some races have a crap fan zone and some races have a really good fan zone, then you deserve to be putting races against each other. And I think F1 did try and do that a bit, but if then it's just pumping loads of money into some of them and then says do it for some other ones and doesn't give them any money, then it can be a little bit, you can understand why a few circuits would be a little bit irritated at that. And why
F1 is very clearly pushing Miami. Like it's very clearly something it wants to. You can see that through that, the Sky Sports coverage went all out as well for it. Like it is very, I can definitely see from that angle that it's maybe a bit, a bit for the rest of us as well.
It depends on how you view it. And I think if there's a lot that's sort of done to, like I say, keep it aspirational, not exclusive and what's the word, sort of just boarded off, if that makes sense, then if you can keep it possible, admittedly for a lot of people, it is impossible to fly over around the world, but from the side of it where, ticket prices were probably a bit too expensive for this weekend, and just sort of boxing people out and not really having too much of an experience to it when you're there, apart from unless you have been in a film or if you're really rich, then that can be, that can be great. So I think it just depends on how it's played with lots of other events as well. Yeah, Nigel has no opinion
nothing to add
because Nigel doesn't know who a celebrity is. Although I can imagine Fast and Furious being a movie Nigel might actually watch.
Never watched it.
No, there we go. No. There's 10.
I haven't watched Anchorman, have I either, Freddie? Remember that from 2 years ago? No.
I think the fact that you can specifically remember a movie you haven't watched.
Because you brought it up on our first birthday podcast.
Because you are like Ron Burgundy. You just put something in front of your face and you would just say it, but you don't know. You don't get the reference, even though it's a very common reference.
Common.
Yeah, it is.
It's on. It's featured in our highlights as well for our second birthday. So if you don't want to scroll all the way back, then you can only scroll a bit of the way back. Although we might have a birthday. Episodes. We have we have birthday highlights playlist. So if you do want Nigel made a 6-minute video that shows the best of the Winging It. 10-minute video which shows the best of the Winging It F1 podcast. So if you do want to see the highlights of that, then go and watch that. It's on YouTube. It's easy to get to. It's on the internet.
On the internet.
Fernando Alonso.
Of course, Fernando Alonso. 3rd place again. his 5th race weekend in a row where he scored 15 points because of the way the sprint and the Baku Grand Prix worked out, meaning he got 15 points like he would for a 3rd place. So he scored 15 points in every race weekend of the year.
Wouldn't it be amazing if he kept getting 3rd and then Aston Martin caught up in the second half of the season and then he wins the championship? Wouldn't that be brilliant?
Yes, that would be amazing.
It would be nuts.
That'd be. Yes, that's the word I was looking for, Freddie.
I would love it, and he keeps doing what he needs to do, and his gap to Perez in qualifying, considering Stroll was out in Q1, I know that's not the best base level, but considering that there were limitations, he did a cracking job, and I think it's definitely, like you were saying earlier, Nigel, about the race being really properly intense for the drivers. I think that really showed up between the Aston Martin teammates.
Yeah, I agree, because he did it on used tyres as well, I think, the first run in Q3, and he was only, 3-4 tenths away, so it was a great lap. Yes, Perez might not have done the best lap himself, but Alonso, he has been excellent this season. He's pretty much been excellent throughout his career for me, apart from one season. But let's not get into that. I think he, in the first stint, the way he kind of kept Sainz in his... Sainz was in his DRS, but then was never close enough to actually mount a challenge for an overtake. So then I think he hurt his tyres from that. And then Sainz pitted first, but Alonso, he didn't lose too much time on the old medium tyres versus Sainz on the hard, new hard tyres. So then that was where he kind of secured 3rd place. And then Sainz obviously had his 5-second time penalty anyway. So it was tactically and obviously drivenly. That's not a word. Drivenly. I'm using it now.
Raced.
It was raced very well. There we go.
It was drivenly very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could have said driven very well.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, driven. I'm just making up bad verbs.
It was tactically and driven well. It was tactically and talented.
It was talented.
It was tactical and talented.
Yeah. That is Fernando Alonso.
It's not Lance Stroll.
Unfortunately,
at least based on
out of the points.
It was a rough weekend. He qualified 18th and finished 12th.
I do think he's one of the drivers to talk about for poor performance of the year for that race weekend, unfortunately.
Well, he didn't crash, did he?
No.
Instantly, it was just a lack of pace. Which I don't know if that's worse actually than a crash. I sometimes think
I was about to say,
if you can control the car, but you just can't control it fast. Whereas if the car's not working for you, so you're slow, so you might crash it. Arguably, it is a bit better, you could say. Which is the sort of the way we let off Charles Leclerc, because he is showing at points pretty immense pace, and like you say, through practice, he was doing very well. And yeah, he is, for want of a better word, crash happy, Charles Leclerc, but he's pushing and pacey. Stroll isn't necessarily pacey, and he got a few races this year in the lower end of the points, and that's kind of it. Compared to his teammate, that's it. There are points where you've got to really, really sort of question it. And I know we've questioned Lance Stroll a lot, but
don't forget he was injured, like coming back from a serious injury. So the first 2 races,
that's true.
No, but this is the thing. He was better in the first 2 races.
Yeah.
Like he came back with no testing in Bahrain, and he was not far off the pace, really. Whereas it feels like Alonso's getting into the car and he isn't. Like it feels like it's moving in the opposite direction. Like it is. It's a rough weekend, and we'll need to see how he goes in Imola and then Monaco. But it's not. There's not been a race this season that's been. Yeah, there's not been a race, and then Barcelona coming up after that. There's not been a race this season where there has been anywhere like the gap that there was today.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is not the best. Nick de Vries is obviously someone we said needed to have a good weekend in Miami. He outqualified his teammate. He did really well to get the AlphaTauri into Q2, and then he threw it all away by just not stopping the car into turn 1 and kind of ruining his and Lando Norris's races, and essentially having his head dropped since then, where Tsunoda was sort of battling with a few people pretty aggressively. So, are we sort of on the same place with the de Vries position as we were in Baku?
he's beginning to make too many mistakes now, isn't he? Very clumsy at the start into turn 1, and you got to ask if he does it again over the next couple of race weekends, then yeah, he's going to struggle. I mean, it's great that he out-qualified Tsunoda for the first time this year. That's a massive, massive positive. So it's sounds pretty obvious, doesn't it? But he's just got to have a clean weekend where he's close or on par or faster than Tsunoda, and that hasn't happened yet. Why are you laughing at me?
The old Albon conundrum. That was what Christian Horner would say.
He was close to it this weekend.
Yeah, well, that's
down when it mattered.
That's what I mean. It was more positive, and it is ultimately him and Tsunoda both had moments. Obviously, Tsunoda didn't do as well as he would have hoped in qualifying, but then he was able to come back in the race with De Vries. It was kind of the opposite way, where once, like Freddie said, it is once he did very well to get in that position, but once he had that one incident at turn 1, then it did kind of go out the window a bit. I actually do think that is a positive, and he can take something out of it, because I really think he's going to struggle in Monaco because it felt like from Baku, then it just felt he's not in touch with the car. And if that's the case, then it's going to be even tougher at Monaco. So he has one more race before that. And that's where there's a bit of positivity coming, is that he has taken that first step. So yeah, now if he can channel that again in qualifying, that's maybe a bit of reason for some optimism for Nick De Vries.
But then the track where you can hustle the car in qualifying, he showed good pace. So who knows? I mean, there could be positivity going into somewhere like Monaco if he can use that sort of to build up a rhythm through the weekend. Who knows? You sort of have to see, because he had the rhythm through this weekend. He had the feel of the car, and then he again threw it away at turn 1 rather than just always being off it. So you're right, there are positives to take from there, and I think they can be applied into the upcoming tracks we have, namely Imola and Monaco, which are tracks you're going to need to be on it. And Imola being a track AlphaTauri have gone very well at in recent years.
Yes.
In the recent years it's been there. Then at least there's a bit of data they can use, perhaps. Who knows? I'm not going to hold my breath, but we'll have to see.
Sorry, I was just holding my breath.
You didn't do a very good job.
Awful.
Was it not audible? Well, obviously it's not audible. I'm holding my breath. What am I on? Shut up.
On car trips, like family car trips, then we do this game where we'd when we went through a tunnel, then we'd hold our breath, and then we do it when sometimes. Well, no, you are allowed to breathe. It's not like a ban on breathing until you get out the tunnel. But then also there are some London. I used to be a lot better than this actually. But there are some in the centre of London, you can go tube stop to tube stop with holding your breath, and make it all the way through until you get to the other. So that's
I could do whole lines, mate.
Listeners to try
tube lines.
Oh, tube lines.
Oh, that's good that you clarified. Thank you.
Yeah,
I thought you meant racing lines.
Oh, I thought different kind of lines.
Move on.
Sorry, throwing you in it there. Another driver, maybe I've got the odd question about now, kind of, because it's been a few races.
Mercedes.
Well, I was going to say Logan.
Is it
Sargent.
the Sargent? Yeah, I think his year is starting to resemble Tsunoda's rookie year, where he went very well in Bahrain. Both of them went very well in Bahrain in season opener, having just come from testing there. So, but after that, it's not. I mean, his Saudi Arabian Grand Prix weekend was really one to forget, but this was up there as well. Really, it just wasn't. Yeah, and there was all the stuff about him coming home as well. He was able to stay at his house for 2 nights in the week, but yeah, it just wasn't good from Sargent.
Yeah, not much. I mean, Adam summed it up perfectly. I think that Tsunoda comparison is an excellent comparison, actually.
I think it's a very good comparison. Because we were talking about
Thank you, Nigel.
Get his confidence in.
Thank you, Freddie.
And unfortunately, he just hasn't yet. He's shown raw pace at points, like Tsunoda did. Tsunoda's still on the F1 grid. There's still, obviously time for him because he's a rookie and it's race 5, but does need to do a bit more now, unfortunately.
Well, and I would say on him, it's like, he has come in straight from being a F2 rookie, which is difficult. And I said it before the season, and then maybe rode back on it a bit after Bahrain, but now kind of more than ever. I think this season does need to be about learning, and next season will be, should be where we really evaluate him on, this year, because he could very well be doing another year of F2 this year, and then he'd have pushed that down a year. So the fact that he stepped up and I feel like he should have bought himself some more time because of that.
I agree, and I love to criticize stuff, and I agree. Yeah.
Realistically, this is Fernando Alonso's fault anyway.
Everything's Fernando Alonso's fault, isn't it, in your eyes, Rudy?
Well, if they'd signed Fernando Alonso very quickly at Alpine up, then there's every chance that the Williams or Piastri deal could have been.
I thought Alonso was going to Williams and Sargent. But so Sargent had to go there.
Also because of that. Definitely.
I blame Matt Hardy. Is it Matt Hardy? Matt Hardy, 1975. Freddie, you'll know this. Taylor Swift dating.
Matt Healy.
That's the one. I blame him.
Not Matt Hardy.
Isn't he a WWE wrestler? Matt Hardy.
I don't know. Tom Hardy's an actor.
Yes. And after this, we can talk about the hardy performance of the Mercedes drivers in the Miami Grand Prix. George Russell said that 6th place on the grid flattered them, and looking at where Hamilton was and looking at where Russell was in Q2 and Q1 as well, anyway, for the most part, he's right. But in the race, it was deserved, I would say, for both of them to finish where they did. 5th and 6th? No, 5th and 7th? 4th and 6th? I have the results in front of me. I can just look at them.
4th and 6th, yeah, and then Ferrari were 5th and 7th because they both made late moves on the Ferrari at the end. I mean, Nigel, you're a bit more down on the Mercedes performance over the weekend, weren't you?
Was I?
Their qualifying.
You thought I put them as a loser
because their qualifying pace was bad.
And earlier, when Freddie was building up to saying Logan Sargent, and you said Mercedes as someone who got some questions.
Oh yeah, yeah. I guess Just I thought it'd be a bit better. Like we said before, the rear downforce seems to be a massive weakness for them. Both drivers were really struggling. Hamilton more so than Russell. So I think massive credit to Russell for adapting better to that than Hamilton, I'd say. But then I think the tyre wear that they've got, which is still pretty good, just not as good as the Red Bull, because Red Bull is the best in it in all the areas. I think that paid dividends on Sunday. So it is a case of qualifying's are going to be quite difficult for Mercedes unless their upgrade gives them a lot of time. And then the Sundays will be much better for them. I think that's what we saw in Miami. And then it's interesting because last year I thought Hamilton was better than Russell overall, but this year I'd say Russell's not convincingly, but he has been better than Hamilton, and that has surprised me a bit. And Miami's kind of underlined that. I think what we saw in Miami sums up their seasons quite well so far for me in terms of Hamilton has just been a bit slower, quite frankly.
In the qualifyings, yeah. Definitely in the qualifyings. I think in the races, that then means that Russell's able to be in a better position, but for the most part, their race pace is pretty much on point. Just because realistically, it's a 10th and a half or something, and that's about it. But Russell, yeah, and you can kind of expect that from someone who's 15 years younger, 14 years younger, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah,
big old gap.
Yeah,
but from an athlete's perspective, you do get those kind of differences, and to have only that deficit is arguably quite good as well. But for the most part, Mercedes managed the race well, but they had very, very obvious limitations with their car that are worrying for the next part of the season. They have been pointing to Imola for forever for their upgrades. Do you guys have any hope for that?
I have hope, but then I always think upgrades, especially from big teams, are always kind of overstated anyway for me, because it is very rare you see a team suddenly gain half a second or more than that. It'll be a few tenths at most, I kind of imagine, especially in the budget cap era. So a few tenths, yes, that could put them on par. Well, it could make them the second best team perhaps, or they'll definitely be more competitive in qualifying. But then it's not gonna massively change their season, I'd say.
Yeah, I think the ceiling of it is that it makes them more competitive with Aston, able to compete with them across the race on a consistent basis. Like, it's not going to be getting anywhere near the Red Bull still, but it's been a bit of a circle of Mercedes going, oh, well, got some upgrades coming, wait till Imola, upgrades to Imola, and then it gets very close. And then there's Russell going, don't get too hyped. They're going to be all right, but they're not going to be amazing. And it's kind of this circle of like, pointing to the upgrade from a long way off. And then as it gets closer and the fans get more excited, then it's like, they'll be all right. So, yeah, I'm not, I don't know. Like, it'll be a step in the right direction, I imagine. If it's not, then they've got a very big problem. But beyond that, it's, I don't see how it will change too much.
Yeah, I mean, they got a new floor, new front suspension, and new something else quite big. I forgot. So these are massive things. Yeah. But yeah, these are massive things for them. So it has to work, and it must be reformed. Because if it doesn't, and from everything Toto Wolff has been saying the last couple of months about how the car's horrible, and I think he's used the word embarrassing or unacceptable at times, then it could be massive, massive trouble. So it's got to at least put them in the right direction. And for the drivers, they've got to have more confidence with it. Because at the moment, it does seem, especially with the rear downforce or the rear of the car, they just can't afford to push the limits of it. So I think that's where they'll be hoping in Imola to get some of that back, and then they can push on from there.
Yeah, I think that's all you can really hope for with that. They are just behind Aston Martin in the constructors' fight for second, and that really is, I think, going to consolidate really in Mercedes' direction as the series goes on, as the season goes on.
Stroll effect.
Well, yeah, but also weekends like this don't necessarily help them, where the Aston Martin can just be on it a bit more and a bit more compliant with the pace, whereas the Mercedes has to struggle a bit through it. So we'll see how that goes throughout the season, because that's probably, I reckon, come mid-season, going to be the hyped fight. Can Mercedes or Aston Martin get second in the Constructors' Championship? Because we'll be clutching at straws. But expect us to speak about it. Expect that. Do you guys have any more things to say on the Miami Grand Prix? I feel like we've covered it pretty well. I'm really glad that Nigel enjoyed it more than Adam and I, but it wasn't awful. It wasn't bad. It had really good performances. It had some really decent moments. I think that's a decent conclusion from my side.
Yeah, McLaren would have hoped to be better. They just weren't really at the races at all. Yeah. And Alpine, I think we mentioned them earlier, but it is after Rossi blasted them in the media ahead of the Miami Grand Prix, then that was a good rebound. Really across the whole weekend, they looked a lot better. And I think Gasly felt slightly disappointed that he couldn't hold on to, was it fifth he was running in or sixth he was running in before? Yeah. A couple of late overtakes from that. So, yeah, I think for those, for the teams that are now joint for fifth in the Constructors' Championship on 14 points, two very contrasting weekends there. McLaren will really hope to be better after those upgrades.
Yeah, I was really surprised by McLaren because I thought they did quite well in Baku, and results wise kind of max-wise what they got, but they showed a lot of potential, I'd say, there. But then in Miami, it's kind of back down to earth for them. So I was very surprised at that. I hope it is I was going to say one-off, but a one-off from Baku for them from the big upgrades that they've brought there. So yeah, I think they'll be quite puzzled actually. Were the pace of source, because yes, they've got a draggy car, but Miami is certainly no draggier than Baku.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see when we come to Imola. We will probably do a preview podcast for Imola because it's 2 weeks' time. Until one sec, let's get the full name for it because it's always a banger. The full name, the Formula One Qatar Airways Gran Premio del Made in Italy dell'Emilia Romagna 2023. Oh, what a name for a Grand Prix!
I'm sure it's been longer in the past.
Well, they've thrown in Qatar Airways.
I think that might be,
something else.
Yeah, I really like the juxtaposition of the Qatar Airways with all of the rest of the Italian. Qatar Airways made in Italy.
Made in Italy, yeah. Did Qatar even fly to Italy? We'll see.
Yes.
There we go.
Probably
they
I'd
do.
imagine so, yeah.
I'd imagine so, but I just do think it would be hilarious if they only fly like one service or something to Italy. Yeah. Doha's a big hub. But anyway, we'll see you for that. We hope you enjoy it. We'll wish Nigel the best of luck in his next adventure, which he can't talk about. Is this Nigel's final appearance on the podcast? Who knows? Either way, here are his highlights. Oh, we don't have any. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. I've been lining that up for weeks. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good week, and we'll see you shortly. Au revoir.
That was very good.